Well, good evening, everyone. I hope you all can hear me well. I'm just unbelievably excited about this entire thing that we're going to be doing this semester. Hello to everyone, wherever you're from. In fact, if you get an opportunity, put it in the chat where you're coming in from, tuning in from. Last year, through our study through Mere Christianity, and last spring, through our study through quite a few different topics and the rest. We had people from China, from the UK, from California to Washington to Florida to Maine, Vermont, Texas, Tennessee, Ohio, all sorts of different places. And I love tuning in and meeting so many of you. And I do know that there's quite a few new individuals who have joined us this time, who are planning on joining us at least. And so let me just tell you, welcome. I'm so excited that you've decided to join us for this series through this fantastic work by C.S. Lewis called the Screwtape Letters. I can't tell you how much it means to me, just the fact that you tune in to listen through this. I hope you have your book. If you don't have your book, it's a great time to get one. You can absolutely get that. I see John Dobbs is tuning in from Monroe, Louisiana. Great to have you there with us. Truly appreciate it. He's been one of my biggest, not just supporters, but also inviting people to come and join our group. Our group has grown exponentially over the past year, from 5 or 6 originally that told me, hey, we should do an online class, online course type thing, to then that snowballed to 250 plus people now in the group, and adding in YouTube and other places where we record this, we're talking about probably 1,000, 2,000 people a week. It blows my mind that people are tuning in that often to do that. I'm grateful that it's the works that you guys are tuning in for, not necessarily myself. I'm grateful that you all have been able and have this desire to continue your education, your studies, to learn a little bit more, especially through these fantastic works. And so great to see some people in there. In fact, I guess my mom actually just tuned in from Henderson, Tennessee. Great to have her with us, obviously. And then Judy Hayes from Dalton, Georgia. And then also, Minion Riley from Monroe, also wonderful. It's great to have you all with us through this study. I'm very, very excited about this. If you don't know me, let me just introduce myself real quick. My name is Brandon Edwards, and I am the campus evangelist at The Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio. I do that work as part of the Buckeyes for Christ student organization. I also am the college evangelist with the Church of Christ on Fishinger Road here in Columbus. We're about a mile and a half off of campus. Been here since the 1800s. Long time. Fantastic church, fantastic work. Love every bit of it. I have about 30 to 40 students I work with each and every week in some form or shape or form along the way, and love the ministry. Been here almost 2 years now, and campus ministry has allowed me for opportunities, especially like this, to look at different topics, different books, and ways to reach into the lives of individuals. Because if you're like me, literature and other forms of art have always kind of spurred my discussions when it comes to religious things, when it comes to faith, when it comes to life in general. And so I'm just grateful that you can join me on that little journey here through this book. If you want to put in the chat, you can tell me how many of you have actually read this book before, if it's your first time, you've never been through it before. I also see Joshua McCloy tuning in from Wyoming. Awesome, man. I don't think we've had Wyoming except for you. So you put us on the map again. I love it. So many people from so many different perspectives. And also know If you're tuning in after the fact, please go ahead and put that in too. Love to know where you are. I do follow up with on the videos and the rest. So it's not just those of you that are live here. Love all the people that are live here. But if you're tuning in after, please feel free to share your comments, your thoughts on the videos along the way, whatever you might like to do. Let me know what you're thinking. Send me a message, any way that I can support or help. Love to communicate with you in some form or fashion. So the other side of me is I am a bit of an academic in a lot of ways. Not only am I a campus minister, but I do have a background in academia. I am grateful and blessed to be part of a family that has, I don't think by any automatic choice or force, but quite a few college professors through the years. My grandfather served at Freed-Hardeman, has served at Freed-Hardeman for close to over 40 years, and the rest. Was also an elder and a preacher in the church and a missionary to Italy. My father, in the same way, 40-plus years in full-time academia at Harding, Freed-Hardeman, and Faulkner University, including running their overseas programs. And then I have begun and continued my education. My undergraduate is in Bible from Freed-Hardeman University, which kind of set the foundation for me on so many things as I've set forth in life. And then later on in life, quite a few years later, in fact, about 15 years later, after having been in ministry full-time for 15 years, had the opportunity and the blessing to go back to graduate school, did my master's in religion from Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and then I also did 2 postgraduate works, one also at Harvard Divinity and Harvard Extension School, which is a postgraduate certificate in religious studies and education, and then one in philosophy from the University of Cambridge in the United Kingdom. All of which is to say this, that's just a little bit of my background, and I hope that might just kind of open some doors for you to realize why I have such a passion for these things. If you've been to Cambridge, you've been to some of those places, C.S. Lewis is actually where he was. It's in fact where he passed away, where he was in this time was in Oxford and England and the rest. And I've always had this fascination with education, with academia, that he's kind of married into those worlds. And so many of his books as a child kind of opened up new worlds to me, especially the Chronicles of Narnia, if you've read those. So with that in mind, if you haven't been with us before, I'll have some slides that you'll be able to see, some things along the way. Please feel free to make comments along the way. If I catch them every now and then, I might chime in, jump in. If you have a question or a thought, I do post questions at times, and especially through this study, it's going to be one that will bring about some discussion concepts. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. And so please put those in the chat. If you're watching after the fact on YouTube, do the same thing. And so I absolutely love to see that and hear those comments. Now, one thing I will note is that tonight is kind of an introduction night, and so I'll be introducing most of this book, including the background of C.S. Lewis. So here we go. We're going into the deep end of the pool. This is part of the rabbit hole study. That's kind of what we termed it about a year and a half ago, and we are diving down into the rabbit hole itself. So C.S. Lewis is more, by his friends, is known as Jack. And so Clive Staples Lewis is his full name. He wasn't a big fan of that, apparently, and so he was often just referred to as Jack by his friends. I'd like to tell you I know exactly why, but I've heard about 7 different stories as to why, and so I'm not going to give you any one in particular. It just seems he wasn't a big fan of his actual name, so Jack it was. He was born in Belfast, Ireland in 1898, and his childhood was fairly normal at that time up until his mother's death in 1908. That affected him fairly heavily to a point where even his childhood faith that he had kind of grown up as part of there in Ireland, he lost it. He became pretty much an avowed atheist during his middle school and even high school years until he was sent to study with a man by the name of Kirkpatrick. Now, Kirkpatrick was an old kind of the old-fashioned educator, had been a headmaster and the rest, and he was a master at rhetoric and logic, and really put Lewis through the ringer academically, almost as a boarding school. And Lewis's older brother had also studied under him and had helped prepare Lewis's older brother, Warren, or Warney as he was known, for the Royal College at Sandhurst and the rest of the military college there. And so he went there, fell in love with education, fell in love with the concept of reading and literature. And when I look at education today, I need to tell you that we're kind of lost as to what things actually, the concept of something that is like studying hard. At the time, Greek Latin and the rest was what he was required to read in middle school. Being able to read the books in their original languages, to study those for hours, 8-10 hours a day, to then when Kirkpatrick would come back at the end of the day, he would have to sit down and discuss with him those different things in those languages, in the original text, in the original meanings. Very different premise of academia today. In 1917, he was accepted to go to Oxford University, which was just as much as it is today, a fairly big deal. It still has very much the acclaim, the academia, the scholarship. I would put Oxford and Cambridge alongside probably Harvard at the top three. Harvard is not doing itself any help these past few days, these past few weeks along the way. In fact, academia has lost its rigor and has lost its way in some of these. Now, I will say my experience with UK schools has been very different than it has been at Harvard, but they still have that prestige at times, whether it's earned nowadays. That's a whole other discussion. But after beginning in at that time, World War I was going on, and he actually went off and fought in World War I. In fact, he was actually wounded, and I want to make sure I remember this right. He was wounded at Mount Berenshon in the Battle of Arras on April 15th in 1918 and was sent back to the States, or not back to the States, back to the UK. And at that time, though, one of his good friends by the name of Paddy Moore, who had been his roommate and the rest and had fought alongside him, was killed in that battle. And so when Lewis came back, he had made a promise that he would take care of Paddy's mother, and that's what he did. He moved in, took care of Paddy's mother, and I believe Paddy's sister also. For quite a few years, he made sure that he took care of them after the death of Paddy. And so he served in World War I. So this is kind of the early life. From there, we have the kind of the college years, which is where he came back and actually went to Oxford to study, published his first book in 1919, moved in with Mrs. Moore in 1920. This was after the death in 1919 of Paddy Moore, after he had recuperated and the rest. Became a philosophy tutor in 1924, and then a fellow at Magdalen College there at University of Oxford. The colleges themselves are kind of like departments almost, and I hate to use this terminology, but it's almost like Hogwarts houses. You're under Hogwarts, but you also have Gryffindor, you have all these different things. The colleges, and I believe at Oxford there's 40-plus colleges that make up the University of Oxford. Same thing with Cambridge, 36, I believe, different colleges at Cambridge. And it's a little bit different than our U.S. system. We don't really have the college concept within that, but he was a fellow at Magdalen College in 1925. So his degrees, what did he study? How did he get to where he was in life? Starts off with he got first in honor moderations in 1920, which was in Greek and Latin literature, which candidly is no surprise whatsoever, because that was what he was so rigorously trained in by Kirkpatrick. And then he did what's called a First in Greats, which was a philosophy and ancient history in 1922. It's kind of the equivalent of a master's postgraduate. Same thing, also a First in English, which is English literature in 1923. And a lot of people think that Lewis was in like a Bible department or a theology department. He wasn't. He was actually in what was considered the classics. And so it was medieval literature and literature where he had his biggest impact. And because he is so well known for his, what we would call almost apologetics works, Mere Christianity, The Abolition of Man, even the Screwtape Letters, when in reality literature was his main arena. He just used the written pen to teach on a consistent basis the things that he believed to be true. So when did those changes happen? And so let me go through a couple of his books first, and I'll note some of the changes. So some of the great fiction books that he wrote, The Pilgrim's Regress. If you've ever heard of The Pilgrim's Progress, this is a different version. This is his own play on that. He had also has written some what we would consider sci-fi type books, which most people aren't necessarily aware of if you're just kind of a cursory reading of Lewis, but Out of the Silver Planet, Voyage to Venus, and then he wrote the Screwtape Letters, That Hideous Strength, The Great Divorce, Till We Have Faces, The Shoddy Lands, and Screwtape Proposes a Toast. These are considered fiction books that he wrote. He also wrote some nonfiction books, which we have The Allegory of Love, a study of medieval tradition, The Personal Heresy, a controversy, The Problem of Pain, The Case for Christianity, a preface of Paradise Lost, The Abolition of Man, Miracles, a preliminary study, Mere Christianity, which was actually an adaptation of what some radio addresses that he had done during World War II, Surprised by Joy, The Shape of My Early Life, and A Grief Observed. All of these are nonfiction books that he wrote. He also had, probably more famously for the children, the Chronicles of Narnia series. And if you note the dates on these, they're actually quite a bit later than some of the early works that he was known for. Mere Christianity, Screwtape Letters, and the rest were in the early 1940s, where The Lion, the Witch, and Wardrobe was 1950, then Prince Caspian, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, The Silver Chair, The Horse and His Boy, The Magician's Nephew, and The Last Battle. Now, those are not necessarily written in the order in which they happen, but they're written in that this is the time frame in which he wrote those books, which are just a fascinating study to go through them, just where you see how he has infused the very story of Jesus as Aslan and the rest to make it palatable, to make it more understanding, very parable-like when it comes down to the biblical imagery and the biblical stories, especially for children. So the end part of his life, in 1929, is where Lewis becomes what I would consider a theist. This is where he gets to a point where he reads and has this conversation where he basically walks away and says, I can't argue the fact that there is a God, And a lot of this was from conversations with fellow professors and the rest, that he was, in his earlier time at Oxford, just shocked that these bright and brilliant men would have these deep religious thoughts, that they had these deep religious beliefs at all. He couldn't believe that they did. And we're talking about some people like J.R.R. Tolkien, if you know that name, from The Lord of the Rings and the rest. He was also a professor at that time at the University of Oxford. And so they became friends along with a few others. And in 1929, he finally came to just this moment where he basically said, and then I believed in God. I believed that there was a God. I became a functional theist, in essence, from there. In 1931 is when Lewis, I think the exact note, and I want to make sure that I read it right for you because it always fascinated me. He said, when we, which was Warney and him, his brother and him, set out by motorbike to head to the zoo, I did not believe that Jesus was the Son of God. And by the time I reached the zoo, I did. And this was part of his conversations with Hugo Dyson and J.R. Tolkien and others who were devout Catholics and so forth. They were talking through all these religious things, and by the time he got to there, he said, by the time I was thinking about it, I wasn't, and by the time I got there, I did believe that Jesus was the Son of God, which is just fascinating in and of itself. And he often referred to himself as the most reluctant convert in all of London. It wasn't because of some great desire for improvement or for his own self and the rest. Instead, it was just rational thought and reasoning that brought him about. In 1933, the Inklings are born. The Inklings is one of the most noted literary clubs and guilds where they would gather together at this lovely little pub called the Eagle and Child there in Oxford. And they would go in and work on books and read each other's books and encourage each other and do first drafts and so forth. And it is believed that many of the works like the Lord of the Rings and Chronicles of Narnia and all those came about from these types of discussions. In 1956, and obviously you see we've jumped quite a bit, World War II, a lot of his writings started to happen. He marries Joy Davidman. Now, it's notable to say this about Davidman because this marriage originally was what we would call a civil marriage. In fact, he specifically married her to keep her from from being deported from the UK. She had moved over there after apparently a fairly nasty divorce in the United States. She is an American and moved over to the UK, became friends. She was a writer herself, became friends with Lewis, and he married her in a civil ceremony specifically so she would not be deported. At that time, they did not live together. There was nothing romantic that anybody knows or implies anywhere I've read at that time, in that moment about that. Then she came down with cancer. And there seems to have been where he felt the duty of a husband, even though it was just a civil marriage, to take care of her. And up to this point in time in his life, he had been a bachelor. His whole entire life, he and his brother Warney had lived at what was called the Kilns, which was their house there in Oxford, the two of them together. And suddenly, Joy Davidman was there, and they were not expecting her to live very long, and she had two young boys. And so seems to be a promise was made that he would take care of the two young boys as she was dying of cancer, and he married her and took her to the Kilns for her basically to live out the rest of her days. Well, kind of miraculously, she recovered from it. Nobody had given her any chance at that point in time of recovering. She recovered from it, and then there seems to have been a real love that kind of spurred between the two of them, and they started just were actually married bedside and actually able to then live out their last year or two together before the cancer came back with quite a vengeance and ultimately claimed her life very early on in life. She was only 45, even though she was about 15 years younger than Lewis. And it was very, very, very quick when that happened, and that devastated him. In fact, that's one of the reasons why we have the book, A Grief Observed, and some of the other ones from there. And then just a few years later, he died in 1963 on November 22nd, which, if you know, it is a fairly famous day. Aldous Huxley died on that same day, along with the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And so Lewis's death would have probably been mourned far more globally, especially as this great author and so forth, had it not happened on the same day as the assassination of John F. Kennedy. So that's kind of the life and times there. So what about the Screwtape Letters? Because we're going to get into this and do a broad overview tonight of this. I love this book. It's a fascinating book. It is considered what we call an epistolary novel. It's a work of fiction written in the form of letters and of documents. And it's a fascinating way to read or to write something. Now, you might actually be asking yourself, epistolary novel, like that just sounds weird, but it also seems like I've heard that word before. Well, you have. The epistles, a letter to a person or a people or a group. The Pauline epistles include Romans, 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and you see so many. There's also the general epistles, including Hebrews, James, 1st, 2nd Peter, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, and Jude. These are letters written to either individuals or groups of people that we are able to read ourselves, and they're written in a letter format. They're called epistles. So an epistolary novel is different than obviously the epistles that we have from Scripture. There are lots of different letters that we have, and I'm grateful for them, and I will make some differentiations between these two, but that is a style in which not only it's not just been one that's done in fiction, it is done in reality. It is done even historically. It's even done through Scripture. It's often referenced as kind of a one-sided conversation. While it may often feel one-sided, so much context and inference can be made that as a literary form, it is truly beautiful. Because there's so many things where it creates patterns and images in your mind. It makes you think through what it is they're trying to paint, what it is they're trying to say, because from letter to letter, you're having to try to figure out, wait, did I miss something in between this letter? Was there something in between this that seems to have happened? What happened from the last time he said something to this time? And that's a very beautiful literary device, but it also happens in reality. In fact, if you know much about biblical criticism or biblical theology in general, there are discussions, especially about the Corinthian letters. Is 1st and 2nd Corinthians actually 2nd and 4th Corinthians? Or are the implications that are there simply because he had already been there, Paul had been there and visited, and thus he's just answering questions? How is it that these things fit together? So it's fascinating to see this as a literary mode, but also the fact that we actually see it throughout Scripture too. So what are some of these more notable differences? Well, the first one is the Screwtape Letters are obviously authored by C.S. Lewis. We know the author of one of the epistles in the Scriptures. We don't know. We don't know who authored the book of Hebrews, although I have my own thoughts on that. One of these days I may give them. I actually believe it's Barnabas, and that's a whole other reason. But all of them are from the same author, so we all know that Lewis is writing this, but it's writing it as if he is a person, Screwtape, which is this high demon, in essence, named Screwtape. They're all the same storyline. Letter to letter, bar one, seem to be in order, and that bar one is an interpretation, one way or the other. It is one single narrative, one complete story from beginning to end. The difference of the epistles, obviously, is that I believe, and I make no qualms about this and take no issue with this, that I believe that they're authored by the Holy Spirit through individually inspired men. And so they do have different authors, Paul, John, Peter, and so forth, and they're not chronological, especially the letters and the way that we have them throughout the New Testament, but they are all one complete story from beginning to end in incredible precision. They're all one single narrative in many ways, even though they're authored by different people at even different times from different cities and different places, and yet they still all have one complete story, one complete narrative, and that's a beautiful epistle for us to understand this. And so I just wanted to give you this kind of breakdown from the epistles but also to an epistolary novel like what the Screwtape Letters is. There is so much inference by context. What is said paints a picture of a place, a time, a person, what he calls the patient, and the characters at hand. And I love that this is what we get to see. So just a couple of quotes that I found specifically about Screwtape Letters. The Screwtape Letters is a satirical novel written by C.S. Lewis, first published in 1942. The book consists of a series of letters written by a senior demon, Screwtape, to his nephew Wormwood, who is a junior tempter. The letters offer advice on how to tempt and corrupt a human soul. The novel is presented as a collection of instructional letters providing insights into the subtle tactics and strategies used by demons to lead people away from faith and virtue. The story is framed as a correspondence between two demons, and through this unique narrative device, Lewis explores the complexities of human nature, morality, and spirituality. The letter covers various aspects of human life, including relationships, morality, and the challenges of living a virtuous life in the face of temptations. One of the central themes of the book is the concept of the enemy. And by the way, I love the reverse concept. So lowerarchy as opposed to hierarchy. The enemy is God as opposed to the way that we would view Satan. And so it's almost like the world has been flipped upside down. Screwtape advises Wormwood on how to exploit human weaknesses, distract them from their spiritual journey, and ultimately secure their damnation. Lewis uses the letters to provide a thought-provoking commentary on the nature of good and evil, free will, and the Christian faith. And the Screwtape's Letters is a powerful and imaginative work that uses humor and satire to address profound theological and philosophical questions. It remains a classic in Christian literature, offering readers a unique perspective on the spiritual struggles faced by individuals in their quest for moral and spiritual fulfillment. It's just so rich. It's just so deep. So what is the storyline? Now, I do need to note this, and I wrote this down to make sure I would remember it, that I have it here somewhere. Let me see, make sure I've got it, because I want to give credit where credit is due, that the storyline that I'm about to share with you was actually put together originally by Andrew Nazelli. And what he did is he broke down every single letter by utilizing just kind of a standard sentence of here's the main premise. So I want to make sure I give him credit for that. And so Andrew Nazelli has done a fantastic, I love this. And so I just want to show you what each letter that we will be going through, kind of the highlight of what will happen. So in letter 1, what are we going to get into? Well, make him preoccupied with ordinary, real life, not arguments or science. And so this is kind of the starting point of where we dive into this very premise, this first letter that is handed over to us from the enemy himself. In letter 2, it's make him disillusioned with the church by highlighting people he self-righteously thinks are strange or hypocritical. We're going to get into that because I think that this is such a huge component of our modern culture right now. Just a massive way in which Satan distracts us by making everything else seem way more important than it really is. Letter 3, annoy him with daily pinpricks from his mother. I'm grateful. My mom's actually listening and reading, so I don't have anything negative to say at all. Absolutely fantastic, always. But so this wouldn't necessarily speak to me, but what I can say is I do understand that there are people in your life at times where this is a reality, where you have those people who seem to just be the ones that kind of prick at your heart or come after you in some form or fashion. Letter 4, keep him from seriously intending to pray at all. And if that fails, suddenly misdirect his focus to himself or an object rather than a person. Letter 5, don't hope for too much from a war, in this case World War II, because the enemy often lets our patients suffer to fortify them and tantalize us. Fascinating way to spin around the very premise of suffering. Letter 6 is capitalize on his uncertainty, divert his attention from the enemy to himself, and redirect his malice to his everyday neighbors and his benevolence to people he does not know. I love this. We're going to get in some rich stuff when it comes to that conversation. Letter 7 says, keep him ignorant of your existence and make him either an extreme patriot or an extreme pacifist who regards his cause as the most important part of Christianity. And boy, is that going to be a fun little week for us to dive into that, especially with where we are in the United States right now politically. That's just a charged conversation. Make good use of your patient series of troughs and peaks, highs and lows, the law of undulation, and beware that the enemy relies on the troughs more than the peaks, the low points to lift us up. Letter 9, capitalize on trough periods, the low periods, by tempting him with sensual pleasures, especially sex, making him content with his moderated religion, and directly attacking his faith as merely a phase. Boy, if I could kind of surmise modern day premise of what I've seen people dabble in, I'm spiritual but not religious. It's this. Where they've been fooled into the concept of a phase. Letter 10, convince him to blend in with his new worldly acquaintances. Don't stand out. Don't be different. Just do what you know what you're supposed to do. Letter 11, understand the 4 causes of laughter: joy, fun, the joke proper, and flippancy, and shrewdly use jokes and flippancy. Make everything just not important. Letter 12, don't underestimate the power of very small sins, because the safest road to hell is the gradual one. That's going to be a rich week. Letter 14, and I think I missed 13, but I'll go back to it. Make him proud of his humility. Use both vainglory and false modesty to keep him from humility's true end. Make him live in the future rather than the present. Oh boy, that's going to be a key one, because this happens all the time. Encourage church hopping. Now, I'm just going to lay this out before you. We may step on some toes when we get to letter 16. Encourage church hopping. This happens more often than we'd like. When we don't get our way, we go somewhere else. And it goes back to even letter number 2, where we go back to the talking of just notice all the things that you don't like about everybody else. Forget yourself. You're not the point. It's everybody else that's got a problem. Letter 17, encourage gluttony through delicacy rather than excess. 18, convince him that the only respectable ground for marriage is being in love. Emotion, emotion, emotion. That's what should drive all that we are. That's what, in essence, these demons are going to get out nonstop. Now, just for a second, step back and think about our culture. What you feel, what you like, what you desire, that's the goal. 19, understand that the enemy does not genuinely love humans, but we don't know what his real motive is. Now, the whole premise is that this is going to be a big key at the end, that he can't possibly love humans. How could you possibly love humans? There's no way. And so there's no way in which the enemy, which is God, could actually love these people. That's just not a real thing. Letter 20, don't give up if your direct attacks on his chastity fail. Try to arrange a desirable marriage. And a desirable marriage in this case is a miserable one, or one that will cause him to be distracted. It might make the pleasures of his life, even the sex and the rest, great and wonderful. However, he loses his faith, and that would be a desirable marriage. Letter 21, convince him to use the pronoun my in the fully possessive sense of ownership. My time, my boots, my wife, my God. That's going to be a big one. Letter 22, understand that the enemy has filled his world full of pleasures and that you must twist them before you can use them. Twist them before you can use them. 23, encourage him to embrace a historical Jesus and to treat Christianity as merely a means to a political end, such as social justice. Now, I need you to know, I didn't change anything. This is written in the 1940s. And yet you think about what's happening in our world today. And so the terminologies, we may think of something different, and he may at times mean something different, but I don't want you to miss that treating Christianity as merely a means in our current culture is a huge trend. In fact, so many people that I know, people that I love dearly even, who for a while, on whether it's a political spectrum one way or the other, will be very adamant about we should not have Christian nationalism or something of that nature. And in the same moment, they claim a Christianity in which, by default, they are claiming a different type of Christian nationalism by their doing the exact opposite. They somehow miss that they have exchanged one God for the other merely because they've embraced a historical Jesus and they treat Christianity as merely a means, as opposed to what it's really meant to be about, which is Jesus and the fact that he came and he died. If you want to look at that, Mere Christianity, the scriptures, the rest, there's fantastic insights in there. Letter 24, confuse him with the spiritual pride for being part of an elite set. I love that one. That one's going to be fun. Replace Mere Christianity with Christianity and by increasing his horror of the same old thing and thus increasing his desire for novelty. We're going to get into that one. That one's got some. That's got some. We might be taking some cleavers to some toes on that one. And I should note, if you've never studied with me, I don't do anything purposefully, but I'm not afraid also of the fact that the reality and the truth often does hurt. And these types of studies, and especially if you're online, actually leans itself to hearing sometimes things that we disagree with, and we can hear it because you and I are not sitting next to each other or in front of each other, and so maybe it's a little bit easier at time to reflect on it, to stop. And it's the same thing for me. There have been so many questions and comments over the past year in our study of Mere Christianity, the rest, that have challenged me, that have pushed me, and the rest. And I love that. So please do. So if you disagree on something, push back. I have no qualms with that. I think it's fantastic. But don't be surprised if I also say, yes, but have you thought about this, or have you looked at this? Let's take this a little bit more. Our search is for truth. It's to find answers. It's not just to have open-ended discussions that never end. Ultimately, we want to get to the truth, and the truth, I believe, is Jesus the Christ. And so just looking for something new, especially when God offers us something eternal, is a dangerous thing to swap out. I don't want something new. I want that which is eternal, and there's a difference between the two most often. Letter 26, sow seeds of unselfishness during his courtship. Letter 27, twist his prayers. I love that one. Letter 28, guard his life so that he grows old, because real worldliness takes time. And so this is something we rarely think or talk about. He's literally saying, make sure you keep him as safe as possible. Don't let him die, because the longer we keep him on earth, the more likely we can get him. We don't think about that much, do we? The idea that somebody would speak in that way about us, trying to keep us around so they can change our mind in the future. Defeat his courage and make him a coward, and then in essence use his cowardice against him. Capitalize on his fatigue and manipulate his emotions with the word real. We will get into the discussions, and I can tell you right now, the concept of real identity, this is who I really am, and the rest is such a huge thing in our world. This is why I love this book, because we're going to deal with real life topics, real life things that Christians are dealing with, that people in the world are dealing with, that all of us are dealing with on a consistent basis. My identity, gender identity, sexuality, all the rest, all of these things fall into these ways at times in which Satan tempts us, tricks us, tries to get us to think of something different than what is actually meant. And Lewis uses this in a different book, where in essence we're making mud pies in the slums when we're being offered a holiday at sea, and yet we're just playing around with things that ultimately do not fulfill in any way, shape, or form. And the last one, letter 31, his end is inexplicable, but we must win in the end. That victory at all cost, in essence, is what it comes down to. So, quick question for you. What does the Bible say about temptation? Is it real? Are there really demons out to get me? Is this not just a work of fiction? And this is a fascinating question, because Lewis, and we'll get into that in the preface next week, will actually start off by saying, look, there's two categories of people. There are times people will fall into a category of either not believing demons are real at all and completely missing the fact that there are people out there trying to catch them, or the opposite of it, where they get so fascinated by the spiritual realm and the rest that they miss reality, that they miss that which is going about, and they become almost confused by the whole premise. So what do the scriptures say to this very premise? Well, in 1 Corinthians, we see no temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. But with the temptation, he will also provide the way of escape, that you may be able to endure it. We know temptation is real, that temptation will come our way. James 4:7 says, submit yourselves therefore to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Here we have a real inclination of a spiritual world, the devil. Hebrews 4, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. In Matthew 26, watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. In 1 John 5:4, we see, for everyone who has been born of God overcomes the world, and this is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith. In Ephesians, it says this, finally be strong in the Lord and the strength of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Are demons real? Yes. Now, don't go so far to a point where it becomes your entire life and concept. Are angels real? Yes. Scripture speaks of them consistently. The spiritual world, the things that we are fighting against, the greatest trick, in essence, Satan has played on so many of us is that we don't believe he's there, that we don't believe he exists. There's nobody out to get us. It's just our failings. And here's the irony. We have enough failings on our own. We fail enough as it is in our life. But we are also being tempted and being tried at times, brought about at times by our own desires. But then there's these demons and others who are utilizing these things, trying to fool us into doing that which Satan wants us to do as opposed to what God wants us to do. And while Screwtape and Wormwood are figments of a beautiful mind, demons are real. I do believe that. I believe Scripture teaches that. I do believe that they do not work in the same way that they did in the first century, especially demon possession and the rest. But I do believe demons are real. And we see that consistently throughout Scripture. Satan is real. The devil is real. Notice this. Be sober-minded. Be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. Don't miss that. Don't miss the fact that we do have one who is working against us on a consistent basis. Well, we've gotten kind of to the end of this introduction. So what is upcoming? What's next week? It's the preface and it's letters 1 and 2. I am just unbelievably excited about this whole entire time that we have together. Cannot wait to spend it with you. I hope this has been enjoyable too. If you're watching this after the fact, add your comments. Tell us what you think. Go along with me. Tell me if I missed something, if there's some information that you would like to know besides what I was able to put out tonight. I look forward to being back with you again next Thursday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And I'm just grateful again for your presence, for all of you that tuned in live. I love all the comments. I'm going to go back and read all of them, see all of them. If you're tuning in at the end and you just want to know, I kind of close out every week with this, and I'll say this. I love you all, even if I've never met you. I'm so grateful that you're going to be part of this journey with us. And if I can serve you in any way, if I can help you in any way, please let me know. I'll be more than happy to. You can reach out, follow me on social media. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of the above. Be happy to get with you and serve you in any way I possibly can. I love you all. Can't wait to see you next week. Hope you have a wonderful, wonderful week. We will see you then.